Now we have some presentations from different parts of the world. We'll start with the 2022 outlook in Amiton countries by Manuel Vasquez, CONESA, and he's a WPTC vice president also. Manuel?
Hi, thank you, Mike. I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm not able to share my screen. No.
Intent.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk about the tomato production and markets in the Amiton countries. Well, I will give some general information. I will give some crop 22 forecasts. I will comment some trade statistics, and I will comment a little bit about the market in the Amiton countries. Well, Amiton, as you know, is the Mediterranean Tomato Processors Association. There are 16 producing countries in Amiton. Last year, production was 18.9 million metric tons. That represents around 48.46% of the world production. The crop 22 production estimation is 16.9 million metric tons. That represents around 2 million metric tons less versus crop 21, and around 11% less than last year. 6 countries, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Turkey, Ukraine, and Greece, are among the top 10 world pig exporters. And 3 countries, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, are among the top 5 world paste exporters. The 1.8 million metric tons of paste has been exported in the last 12 years. That represents around 58% of the total world export. And as characteristics in the Amiton countries, a huge variety of products and formats. In this graph, you can see the world production evolution per region in the last 16 years. And as you can see, Amiton region is the only one with a clear growth tendency in the last 16 years. The next graph is the same information, but in this case, it is in percentage. And here you have both the world production evolution per region in the last 16 years in metric tons or in percentage. As you can see, Amiton is the only one with a clear tendency growth among the regions. In this graph, you can see the Amiton countries' production evolution in the last 16 years. So the number 1 per volume is Italy, second is Spain, followed by Turkey and Portugal. And in the next slide, I have removed Spain and Italy for seeing the rest of the countries. So this is Turkey, Portugal, Iran, Algeria, Tunisia, Ukraine, Russia, Egypt, Greece, France, and Hungary. The main growth in the last 6 years is coming from Ukraine, Russia, Egypt, Algeria, and Tunisia. In this graph, what I did is to make the 5 years average over the last 15 years, so the period 2008, 2012, 2013, 2017, and 2018 to 2022. So Italy is stable around 5 million metric tons. Spain has grown from 2.1 to 2.9 million metric tons. Turkey stable around 2 million metric tons. Iran decreased from 1.9 to 1.2 million metric tons. Portugal has grown from 1.1 to 1.4 million metric tons. Greece has decreased from 0.6 to 0.38 million metric tons. Russia has a big growth from practically nothing to 0.54 million metric tons. Ukraine also an important growth from 0.3 to 0.7 million metric tons. Egypt also an important growth from 0.17 to 0.42. Algeria also an important growth from 0.3 to 0.8 million metric tons. And France, Israel, Hungary, and Tunisia are stable among the last 15 years. Well, now I'm going to talk about the crop 22 forecast. Some remarks. Well, Tunisia, first intention was to plant 17,000 hectares, like in crop 21, but finally around 13,000 hectares are going to be planted due to lack of water, mainly in the northeast region of Gabon. The yield expected is around 67 tons per hectare. Turkey, well, high inflation, rising cost of inputs and competition with corn and cotton are dealing to a reduction of 30 to 40% in the south, a little change in the center and north of the country. Contract prices are double in Turkish lira than last year, but half of the crop is not contracted, and typically is bought this half of the crop during the crop on the spot market. The government are incentivizing to plant corn. Well, Ukraine, this is information coming from Oleski. From here, I give all my support to him and to the Ukrainian people, and I hope that the situation over there is ended as soon as possible. Well, the information given by Oleski is that in Kherson region, that represents 40% of the area, is occupied by Russia. Mykolaiv is around 50% of the area is fighting. The season should be at least 3 weeks late, and it's still possible to process about 500,000 metric tons, but it will strongly depend on the success of the Ukrainian army and the negotiations in the next 2 weeks. France, 2,150 hectares are going to be planted versus 2,560 hectares planted in crop 21. There have been 2 consecutive bad years in Southwest, plus competitive crops makes difficult increase the surface. Greek acreage will be similar to last year in the south, whilst in the center will decrease because strong competition with the cotton and wheat. Hungary, winter very dry, but no water shortage expected. Strong competition with alternative crops. Expected acreage similar or slightly lower than last crop. Russia, surface to be planted is around 7,500 hectares, same volume that last crop. North Italy, well, no price agreement yet. Surface will be reduced because cost increase and high competition of corn and soya. It is forecasted a 10% reduction in volume. Winter is dry and mild with some rainfall deficit in the Emilia-Romagna region. South Italy, no price agreement yet, but as last year was very high the price, it is not expected an important increase. Volumes are expected to be reduced by 10% versus last crop, and transport costs from Puglia will increase a lot. There is no water issues at the moment. Portugal, it has been difficult for processors to get all surfaces required due to competitive crops and cost increase for farmers. It could be some issues with water if there is no rains in March. Spain, we have a very dry autumn and spring, early spring, with with much less rains than the normal. As a result, in Andalusia, there's an important reduction of 60% of the surface with one factory not opening. In Extremadura, also because of the lack of water, initial contracted surface was less 35%. Now there has been allocation for 3,500 hectares. So that makes a potential reduction of around 25%, but still a lot of uncertainty as it's not very clear the water allocation and the way in which this water is going to be used. And also there is still a lot of pressure from alternative crops. Overall, it's expected a reduction in volume of 22%. And it has been a very tough negotiation with farmers because the lack of water, the huge cost increase and alternative crops. In Egypt, there has been frost and cold weather that has affected the color of winter crop. Although yields are good, volume is expected to be similar to last crop. In this table, well, you can see that last year production in Amazon countries was 18.9 million metric tons. The forecasted production for this year is 16.9 metric tons. That means a reduction in around 2 million, and percentage around 11% less. Well, the biggest reduction is in Ukraine with a lot of uncertainty still, but then Spain by 21.5% because of the lack of water, and then Italy, Turkey, and Portugal around 10% reduction. So an important reduction in American countries is expected for this crop. Well, about the fresh tomato price.
Bueno, con respecto al precio del tomate fresco, dentro de los países AMITON ha habido un gran aumento de precio en todos los países en 2022 debido a dos razones. Una fue que en España, como otros cultivos alternativos, como cereales, algodón, y hubo un alto precio, y también hubo un alto incremento de costos para los productores de fertilizantes, incluso de 3 veces más, en diésel de 1,5, incluso para el riego por goteo el 40%, y especialmente en España ha aumentado el precio debido a la falta de agua, y como ya mencioné, en el norte de Italia y el sur, norte de España y el sur de Italia, también el precio será sobre este nivel, pero en España va a ser 102, en Portugal será 97, Turquía 85, Grecia 100 y en Francia 102. Van a haber un aumento importante de precios para la materia prima en los países AMITON.
Information, but I will try to summarize. This is the evolution of during the last 24 years of the exports in Greek, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Turkey, and Ukraine. Overall, AMITON countries has reported in the last 12 months decrease of 174 metric tons of pay. That means less 8.3%. Clearly, after COVID, export has been reduced. The only two countries that has not faced a reduction has been Turkey and Greece, with an increase of 35 and 33% increase. The same tendency has been also in the top 10 exporters countries, including AMITON ones, with a reduction of 7.6. But if we just consider Chile, China, and USA, these three countries has an average reduction of 6.5%. So AMITON has faced a bigger reduction than the non-AMITON export countries in the last 12 months. In this graph, what I have tried to represent is, let's say, is the month-to-year export of tomato paste in AMITON and other top 10 export countries since January 20 till December 21. And well, as you can see, in AMITON countries, COVID had a positive impact in export from March 20 till February 21, where export increased. And after February 21, month-to-year exports remain higher than pre-COVID. It's a good point. Instead, non-AMITON top 10 exporter countries, as I mentioned, is basically China, Chile, and USA, practically had no effect on export because of the COVID, and now even lower figures than pre-COVID. Probably this is because they have focused in the internal market, mainly USA. About price, well, this is based on trade statistics from different tariff codes. So price have increased in crop 21 between 18 to 30%, depending on the products and the countries in all regions all over the world. The first price reference for crop 22 is California. So you can see with an important price increase by around 50%. Price levels are going to be well above those that we saw in the crop 2014. That has been one of the highest in the past. Well, some remarks about the market. We have already commented about the huge price increase in the tomato, but this is not the only one that AMITON countries and basically or mostly European countries are going to face. The second input in the cost for tomato paste is natural gas. Here is represented the natural gas TTF futures price for summer 22. As you can see, has moved from around 25 euros per megawatt during the summer to a peak of even 200 during this month. Well, the way in which natural gas price is contracted has dramatically changed since the end of the year 2021. Before, the price was fixed for a quarter and based on the average Brent price of the precedent semester and dollar-euro exchange rate of the precedent quarter. Now, due to the volatility of natural gas price, gas companies are just offering monthly prices based on TTF futures month ahead with a small discount. This is a big change because up to crop 21, gas prices was fixed for the quarter in which crops take place, so July, September. Now it's absolutely impossible to know which is going to be the price unless it's hedged. And now due to the volatility, probably it's not the best moment. As you can see, the graph in in March 7th, the natural gas price was 810% more expensive than last year. Currently, that is around 100. It's around 400% anyway expensive than last year. Another important cost increase that European producers are going to suffer is the electricity. In this graph is shown the price of the electricity price in the various markets, Spanish, Spain, and Portugal. As you can see, it has grown a lot since the summer till now. And here, for instance, this is the March evolution price, and we have a peak on the 8th of March of 544 euros per megawatt. Since summer 21 the price has increased in electricity by around 350, and also with a lot of volatility as this product is linked to natural gas. A new cost that European producers are going to support is this related to CO2 emissions. Till last crop, we have free ride emissions, and we do not need to go to the market to buy the rights. Now the free ride emission has been decreased by around 18%. As you can see, the price of the CO2 metric ton, the ton of CO2 has evolved from 33 euros to a peak of 90, and now it's around 72. Apart from this, we have also citric acid, wooden pallets, steel drums, septic bags, diesel and chemicals for water station and cleaning. So everything is absolutely increasing. So cost increase for crop 22 is huge, not only direct costs, as we have already seen, but also fixed costs because production is going to be less in most of the American countries, and also financing because the all cost increase. Well, some remarks about the market. Well, the world production increase in crop 21 has not been enough to cover demand. The first WPTC production estimation around 39.6 million metric tons is just 1.24 more than last crop, and with a lot of uncertainty. So it's not. I think it's not going to be enough to cover the gap in the market. There is absolutely no unsold stock of dyes and paste all over the world. There is still a strong demand from industrial and retailers. There is a possibility to arrive to the new crop with negative stock. There is low water availability for crop in California, Chile, and Spain that makes these countries the production to be really uncertain. We have already commented about the high prices of competing crops with tomato that can make also further reduction. And already commented the huge cost increase for processing farmers, and all inputs prices are skyrocketing. So huge price increase in paste, dyes, and powder need to be expected for crop 22, and those prices will be indexed to natural gas price. So probably this is a situation in which price really needs to be indexed to natural gas prices, because we really do not know how much it's going to be during the crop. And also, finally, but not less important, the freight situation is becoming very, very worrying all around the world, not only in terms of price that are incredibly high, but also in availability of trucks and containers. And well, for finishing my presentation, a slide thinking in the future. Well, here in this graph, it's represented the world production since 1995. As you can see, there has been always peaks, and the peaks has been always higher than the precedent one, with the exception of the 2015. But last important peak was in 2015. After that, looks like the tendency cycles has changed. So these big peaks followed by the valleys and peaks looks like that from 2015 on has changed the cycle. Clearly, the situation is different than in other occasions. Well, after 2015, consolidations took place in Europe. Some operation has been closed in China and USA, and this has reduced the offer. So there's less capacity in the market. There is less land availability in some countries, like it's been happening in California or in Spain, in Portugal, where the permanent crops like olive trees or almonds are grown a lot. And also the competitive crops like corn, cotton, soya, sunflower, in the last 2-3 years are competing much more than in the precedent year. So in this scenario, the crop 22, we could expect a major increase, but looks like it's difficult to increase production. Of course, it's always difficult to predict the future, but it seems that it's not easy to increase rapidly the production. This could lead to more stability, but hopefully, yes. Well, and that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and good crop for all. I think that at the end of the session we can ask some questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mike, please.
Unmute. There we go. Thank you, Manuel. Next, we'll have Outlook in Asia and the Southern Hemisphere by Jason Fritsch with Kagome, Australia, and also a WPTC Vice President.
Okay, Mike, you got me?
Yes.
Okay. My presentation today, as Mike's alluded to, is about the Asian and Southern Hemisphere tomato processing, production, and markets. And the area is primarily on the southern, all the countries, consisting of 8 countries who are members of the WPTC, which includes Brazil, forecast for 1.8 million tonnes for 2022, Peru at 125,000 metric tonnes, Chile at 1,050,000 metric tonnes, Argentina at 630,000 metric tonnes, South Africa at 166,000 tonnes, Australia at 255,000 tonnes, Japan at 29,000 tonnes, and China at 5.8 million tonnes. And I'm just trying to reduce my screen here. And the 22 forecast for tomato production is in February for the February production. And these are countries from Chile, Argentina, Australia, Peru, and with South Africa from the Western Cape is of 42,000 tonnes in South Africa is 2.1 million tonnes. In July production, which is China, Brazil, the Limpopo area, which is the northeast tip of South Africa, and Japan is 7.7 million tonnes. So global production for these countries is tipping out at 9.85 million tonnes. And this is the red line here in production over the last 10 or 11 years. On the left hand here, we have hectares, which is the blue lines. You can see it's been relatively stable, some fluctuation, but the red line is yield, and in tomatoes by 1,000 tonne increments. So it's 9.85 million tonnes, which represents 25% of the global forecast production in 2022. The total volume of processing tomato production has remained relatively flat since 2014 from these 8 countries. China, Brazil, Chile, and Argentina represent around 94% of the volume in the Southern Hemisphere and Asian processing tomato countries, and I will focus more on these 4 countries in my presentation. Interestingly, across a large area, the forecast processing yield for 2022 is at 104 metric tonnes, and that increase is largely driven by China. In total, from these 8 countries, total paste exports was at 963,000 tonnes of tomato paste in 2021. But the paste export volumes have been declining slightly over the last 3 years, of 170,000 tonne reduction since 2019. And this is circa 1 million metric tonnes raw material equivalent. Paste imports have remained relatively flat. Dice volumes have stayed relatively flat as well, although we have had a slight decrease in volume since the previous year. So now I'm going to focus on China and the processing tomato area and volume. You can see here they're forecasting 5.8 million tonnes, and area is remaining relatively flat. The 5.8 million tonnes is forecast at 113 metric tonnes per hectare across 51,333 hectares. And you can see here, this is the reported yields from China over the long term, and the reported yield has steadily increased since 2012. And I mean, that's a very good yield from China, which is being reported. The comments coming out of China is that they do not expect much more growth in yield, and the aim is to maintain the 5.8 million metric tonnes into the future. Their total export volumes, however, from China is decreasing, and down to a volume of, over the long term, as you can see here, in 2021, they exported 770,000 tonnes. This is a 160,000 tonne reduction in paste exports in the last 3 years since 2019, or circa 1 million metric tonnes of raw material. So overall, it's clear that China's volume as export is reducing over time. In regards to their dice volumes, China's transformed from a net exporter of dice, which is the blue line, back in 2014 to a net importer, although they've made some recovery here in recent times. With regards to Brazil, they are forecasting 1.8 million metric tonnes this coming year, and it's an increase of 50% in the last 4 years of volume from 2019 to 2022 forecast. And that's from 1.2 million tonnes to 1.8 million tonnes. The tomato yield is staying relatively flat for the last 3 years at 93 tonnes per hectare. And as I communicated, and the average price for this coming season is $82 US, which is back consistent with what they were paying roughly in 2016, 17, and 18. I'd make a note here of 2000 20, which was forecasted or was communicated at $45, and yet to get confirmation of that. Brazil is a net importer of tomato paste. Their volume has been declining slightly over the last 10 years. However, there's been significant variability in those volumes. They are a net importer of tomato dice, and those volumes are increasing, steadily increasing over time. With Chile, we're forecasting 1,050,000 metric tonnes for 2022, which is down from 1.174 in 2020. The reduction in processing volume is a direct result of reduced area planted. The processing tomato yield and price, the yield has remained relatively flat since 2014. And the tomato price is set at $85 in 2020. So very similar to the previous year. Chile exports, as Manuel communicated, a significant exporter of tomato paste into the global system, greater than 80%. And that has been growing steadily over time, certainly over the last 10 years. However, it is important to note that even in the last 3 years, we have seen a significant decline in volumes, or a slight decline, I would say, in volumes as it comes off a bit. And it's probably just back to the trend. They import very small volumes of diced tomatoes, but that volume is continuing to grow. Argentina, processing tomato production has increased by 60% in the last 4 years from a volume down, and that's a 235,000 tonne increase to 630,000 tonnes forecast for 2022. The increase is largely a result of increased planting area. As you can see here in the blue lines, it's gone from some 5,500 hectares up to almost 8,000 hectares in Argentina. Their processing tomato yields and price is increasing consistently over time. Important to note that back in 2010, they were averaging around 50 tonne per hectare. This year in 2022, they're forecasting 81 metric tonnes per hectare. The yield increase is a direct result of research and transference of technologies overseen by the Tomato 2000 Association, and their tomato price of $90 per tonne for 2022 forecast. And you can see pricing for producers in the field is increasing from $80 roughly to $90 in the last 4 years. And finally, with Argentina, they're a net importer of tomato paste. Note that there's a significant drop-off in volumes imported from 2020 to 2021. And this is a reduction in imports because of high incremental field production plus low local consumption. And finally, dice volumes remain relatively flat after this spike in 2017. So that pretty much sums up the Southern Hemisphere and Asian countries. Volumes are coming off from previous years. I think Manuel has covered the situation very well. It's quite similar to the Emertom area where growing costs are increasing. There's other pressures from other crops that are competitive, and growers are reluctant to increase area under the current environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And now I'll do North America and kind of go over a little bit. It is pretty interesting, just as a side note, when we're all discussing a lot of the, I think what you'll hear is a lot of the issues that growers and processors are dealing with around the world are very similar this year with regards to costs and growing conditions. Let me pull this up. Is that up?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you, and we'll get going. Canada, last year, and all my presentations today are in short tons, US tons. Canada last year had 443,000 tons. This year, their estimate is for 525,000 tons. Last year, they hoped for a crop of about 548. Some heavy rains that they experienced in the season, along with some disease that showed up later during the harvest, really lowered their crop by about 100,000 tons last year. They're hoping to get, like I said, 525,000 tons for this coming year. They're having in discussions with them similar issues. A lot of the crops that can be grown this year are competing for the acres and tomatoes. And so they're going to look forward to a better year, obviously, than last year. Midwest is going to be very similar to what it's done the last couple of years, about 510,000 tons. And discussions with them very similar. Soy, corn, a few other things are competitive. They feel pretty comfortable that they'll be able to get the 510 at this point. Last year, some issues with rain and other things. Hold on one second. Beauties of Zoom. Due to some issues, they had some issues last year with the crops, but overall was pretty decent and close to what they were. Looking at California, this is the bulk of where we grow. These are 2021 look. We have about 239 growers. The average size about 958 acres, about 45,000 tons, and 99% of the tomatoes are grown in these 16 counties. It appears to me over time we might see a little shift in some of these other counties as water situation gets a little tighter. We're moving, around to different areas that may have, better water, different water allocations. In January, we had the USDA intentions report, and it was for 245,000 acres. Last year, we were at 229,000. It's an intentions report, and we'll kind of go over that in a little bit, but just one, those are the numbers that came out on that same report. It said we'd have 12.2 million short tons. Last year, we were about 10.8 million tons. Last year's crop, weather issues. We've had heat, disease pressure has been building to, we had a yield of about just under 47 tons per acre. You can see from an industry standpoint over the last few years, we're at a pretty much, I'd say, a flat to declining yield position. Like I said, water, a lot of the crop was going on wells last year. We're seeing a little bit more disease pressure with our crop rotations and just some heat that we've had over the last couple years, especially intense heat at certain times of the year. And so we averaged a 46.99 last year. This year, the intentions report said 49.8. On a historical basis, a 5-year average, we're a lot closer to 48 ton. Looking at 2022, we had a December price agreement of $105 a ton, reduced inventory position, inflation, cost pressures on both sides of the business that others have discussed. Acres with water availability are in a high demand for all row crops at this point. And then we have the rainfall here in California. It's basically non-existent since January. We had almost a record rainfall in December, had our historical averages in the 130, 140% for that time of year. And really, since that point, we have had basically zero rainfall since January. Driest January and February. We've had a few little showers in March, but nothing to speak of in a that will help the situation. So what happens, just for a little background, we'll have this rainfall, and then they'll use models for historical averages from this point on to the end of the season, and that's how much water we expect to get in the system. How much water's in the system will tell a grower how much allocation they can expect to get. And since it's been dry basically since January, those allocations have been reduced. The expectations have been reduced. We're seeing reductions in allocations not only in the southern part of the state, but the northern part of the state. There's basically just in Shasta, our largest reservoir in the state, it's at the lowest point that we've seen in many years, if not all time. As the year goes on, we continue to see input costs continue to rise with the situations around the globe, supply chain issues coming out of COVID, some expected, some unexpected that we knew would be coming, but basically increasing the cost pressures on both sides of the business. Over the last few months, we've seen other row crops look very attractive due to competition for water and acres at this point. Really out in here in California, the limiting factor is water and not acres. And it's, return per acre foot is what some of the growers are looking at. And also with some of these crops coming up in the last few months, increasing the demand in the field. It's based on return versus risk also in some cases. I think this will be the second year in a row the industry will not be able to source the acres they intended based on just how the water situation and some of the other crops, competitive crops are playing out. So kind of looking back at the intentions report, and I think it's important, it's an intentions report that comes out that everyone, the processors submit their intentions to USDA. USDA collects that data and then prints that report that we then put out, and it gets pretty much shared throughout the US and the world. It's what is the intent? What are we trying to achieve? What do we hope to achieve this year, and trying to contract with growers? And this is the amount of tons that we want for this year. Since that time, obviously the water situation has worsened and competitive crop options have also improved. So just kind of looking, as a scale, at 245, that's obviously the 12.2 that was reported. And I just threw out, at 235 at the same tons per acre, the 49.8 that's in that report, would be a crop of about 11.7, somewhere close to where we were last year at 225. We had 229 planted last year. It would be right around 11.2. And if we had 215, we'd be at 10.7. I think it's important to understand that while that intentions report is there, a lot has changed since then. And we will have a new official estimate in May, but in all likelihood, there's going to be somewhere in the lower end of these numbers, and it's going to be a little bit different than what the original intentions were for the reasons stated above. Looking at the inventory on the 6-month side, the red line is the 6-month disappearance. We moved right just under 6.4 million tons the last few months, and the green line is the inventory. You can see this is the lowest December 1st inventory we've had at any point in the last, well, this chart goes back to 2012, but I would say goes back, you could go back to at least 2007 and 8 and see that this will be the lowest that we've had. You know, the story, lower crops, a little increase in movement, and you know, we're at this position where we have this lower, very, very tight inventory heading into this next crop year. Price history this year, like you said, the price was set in December at $105 US ton. Last year, the price was $84.50. I think both sides wanted to, you know, get a price done early so both sides could commit. At the time, you see, like I said, it was raining. You had a different global outlook, I think, than we're seeing today. Both in cost, we're seeing the same that other presenters have said, increase in fertilizer, increase in fuel, and then the lack of rainfall has just made it a more competitive landscape. I think looking ahead for 2023, inventory for a second year in a row will be extremely tight conditions. The water situation will continue to be a major issue. You're going to see crops growers be looking at what crops they want to grow to next year. You know, you start thinking about that obviously in August. You start making decisions maybe on onion and garlic in August, September. You have people, you know, in October, November, you know, deciding what crops you want to see. And at that point here, we will be looking at very low allocations, very tight water situation. You know, it's going to be, you're going to start really with a pretty bleak, I think, water scenario, and hope we get a very good rainfall next year to make a difference. And also right now, a majority of the other row crops currently look very attractive, you know, versus the risk side on tomatoes. And that's what I have. And I know there will be questions at the end. So I will, we'll have people read the questions at the end. Hold on. Now I'd like to introduce Francois Branthome. He's going to talk about global consumption and tomato products for 2020 and 2021.
Okay. I share, no. I don't know how to share the screen, sorry. Do you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, we
can
do,
you hear me?
Francois, put it on presentation mode, please.
Okay.
Okay,
That's good.
well done.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee to give me the opportunity to present the results of the 14th edition of the Consumption Study commissioned by WPTC. As a brief background to the 2020-21 marketing year, already commented on by Mr. Vasquez, Fritsch, and Montna, it can be noted that the 38.4 million metric tons processed last year represented 3% more than in the previous season. And they were also 5% higher than processed on average over the previous 3-year period. Along with the processing activity, global trade of tomato products mobilized more than 25 million metric tons equivalent of fresh tomato, which represented almost 2/3 of processed quantities. This 25 millions level marks a 1% increase from the previous marketing year, and it was also 5% higher than the average level recorded over the pre-COVID 3-year period between 2017 and 2019. Regarding carryover stocks, we still don't have accurate figures except for the US market, but information provided by industrial sources shows that remaining quantities were very low in June 2020 and even lower in 2021. Sorry. So I think there is no need to come back in details about global processing. As already shown by previous speakers, 45% of quantities processed last year were harvested in AMITOM countries. 29% were grown in Northern America, and 26% were grown in other parts of the world. Before going any further in the analysis of consumption, I think it's worth to come back to the global trade and detail one of its major components, the evolution of which weighs heavily on the global dynamics. While quantities of raw material absorbed by the global trade of sauces and ketchup for one part and canned tomatoes for the other have grown at the annual growth rate of 4% and 2.5% respectively over the past decade, volumes absorbed by trade of concentrated purees have grown over the same period at the modest rate of 1.7% per year for the overall activity, and only 0.8% for the share of the global supply covered by the top 10 exporting countries of the sector. These contrasted results may be explained by the basic dynamic, which has been observed for several years in trade patterns, which is combining an increasing demand for low concentration products and a stagnation of the medium and high concentration product segments. These dynamics are even more significant when expressed in terms of raw material, and they are affecting directly the features of global consumption. As you can see, export growth in the most concentrated product categories has been at best very slow, while it has been very strong for low concentration products. This means that sustaining high global levels of consumption requires a strategic reflection on the nature of the product and no longer only on the quantities intrinsically consumed. It will no longer be only a question of selling 2 boxes instead of 1, but to sell a content with an equivalent in fresh tomato that mobilizes the agricultural upstream significantly. In the absence of detailed facts or figures regarding stocks, I would simply like to quote the words of an important processor in southern Italy, who commented on the situation of the industry and said at the beginning of March this year that he didn't think he would be able to supply the market until August, as reserves stored had already been sold out since last summer. And he worried about dropping consumption, soaring inflation, and weakening of purchasing power. So now let's get to the heart of the matter. Based on processing, trade, and stocks figures and estimates, the current study provides a range of results for the last marketing year, the highest being around 37.4 million metric tons, and the lowest around 36.7, with an average very close to 37 million tons of fresh equivalent. This level means the year-on-year increase was lower than 0.5% from the previous result. In this connection, it seems that the 2020-21 marketing year continued to make headway in an uncertain or flat dynamic, which took advantage of the impetus given in 2020, when the pandemic and the lockdowns boosted consumption. This occurrence of this plateau last year can be interpreted in different ways. First, as a consolidation of the good result of previous year, then as a sign of market or industry uncertainty, and finally, as a limit imposed by the physical availability of products after 18 months of sustained pace of consumption. So it could be said that one of the key characteristics of consumption last year was that there were no significant changes compared with the previous one. Indeed, this is true for the distribution of the regional components of global consumption, with North America holding the first place with more than 8 million tons consumed, European Union the second one with more than 7.3 million tons, then Middle East with 3.9 million, and Eurasia with 3.3 million tons. There were also no significant changes in the global average level of individual consumption, which remained close to 4.9 kilograms per person, nor in the regional per capita components of global consumption. With an individual level close to 22 kilograms, North America still remains the world's #1, followed by Australia, New Zealand, with more than 18 kilograms, and now, as a result of Brexit, the region of Europe outside EU at the third place with 17 kilograms, just ahead of Western EU, 16 kilograms, Middle East with 15 kilograms, and then Eastern EU with 13 kilograms. It's also interesting to have a short look at the contrasted differences in the way the COVID pandemic affected regional levels of individual consumption. As already mentioned, the global average level recorded a significant increase in 2019-2020 from 4.5 to 4.9 kilograms. And this high level seems to have persisted over the last marketing year. The regions the most affected by the COVID effects were also those which already posted high levels of individual consumption before the outbreak of the pandemic, such as North America, Middle East, Eastern EU, Mediterranean, Africa, Eurasia, etc. For the others, the results are too low or too approximate to express a significant conclusion. For those of you who attended previous congresses and Tomato News webinars, this slide is now a regular image of our consumption studies. It takes stock of the characteristic of growth in the different regions, distinguishing between regions where consumption growth was driven by the development of individual consumption, the green vertical bars, as opposed to those where development was essentially based on demography, the red ones. As you can see, the development in most regions was driven by the growth in individual consumption, and this is actually a very positive point. Population growth is more or less marked depending on the region, but practically everywhere positive, between 0 and 2% per year. This means that the strategic driver of growth remains the attractiveness of our tomato products for the end consumers. In regions showing very low or even negative growth rate in per capita consumption, development is driven only by demography, and quantities consumed are often steadily decreasing. As already mentioned, the combination of demographic and individual consumption driving forces places North America at the forefront of regions consuming processed tomato products, ahead of the EU, the Western and Eastern part, the Middle East, and Eurasia. These four regions accounted last year for more than 60% of global consumption. As a conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the measurement we give of global consumption of tomato products, 37 million metric tons in 2020-21, is always and strictly expressed in metric tons of fresh tomato, which clearly indicates the whole agricultural or agro-industrial dimension of our activity. Finally, the qualitative component is getting more and more important in the design of consumption. Each change in demand impacts processed and thus harvested quantities either directly by accelerating or curbing consumption, or indirectly by changing the nature of the product requested by consumers, for instance, by focusing more on final products based on low concentration industrial products. But anyways, it ultimately affects the processing activity and even more the dedicated areas and agricultural upstream. Before answering any question, I thank you for your attention and wish us all a pleasant spring and above all, a very, very good harvest season. I don't know how to leave. Well, thank you.
Okay. First of all, we want to thank for the World Processing Tomato Council and the International Society for Horticultural Science for trusting our province to host this event. And we also want to thank the Asociación Tomate 2000, Grupo Arcor, and Gobierno de San Juan for organizing and being part of this organizing committee of this event. We invite you to see a video of another of our sponsors. El otro video, por favor.
Somos Arcor, un grupo multinacional de origen argentino líder en la industria de alimentos con presencia en más de 100 países. Somos la principal empresa elaboradora de conservas de tomate y pasta de tomate de Argentina. En nuestra planta Arcor San Juan, procesamos más de 150.000 toneladas de tomate al año en 11 líneas de producción para elaborar más de 80 tipos de productos en forma de enlatados, salsas, aderezos y purés bajo distintas marcas. En las líneas Sigue Combi Block y Tetra Pak, preparamos y envasamos el puré de tomate en sus diversas presentaciones. Y en las líneas de envase tipo Doy Pack, preparamos y envasamos las presentaciones de salsa de tomate y los aderezos, ketchup y barbacoa. Además, producimos nuestras propias latas para envasar. Contamos con normas de calidad, seguridad alimentaria, salud ocupacional y responsabilidad social reconocidas internacionalmente. A través de la forma en que producimos, garantizamos la calidad, cantidad e inocuidad de nuestros productos y aseguramos el cuidado ambiental y la responsabilidad social en las regiones donde operamos. Cultivamos nuestros tomates en la provincia de San Juan, en una superficie de 1.500 hectáreas al pie de la cordillera. Los cosechamos en el pico de madurez, los seleccionamos rigurosamente y los enlatamos en cuestión de horas para conservar sus propiedades nutricionales y su sabor. Para el cultivo de nuestros tomates, elegimos la mejor zona y el mejor suelo. Hacemos un uso racional del agua en una región de escasez hídrica y acompañamos y capacitamos a nuestros productores de tomate en las distintas etapas del cultivo para profesionalizar la actividad de las pequeñas y medianas empresas que nos proveen de materias primas y servicios agrícolas. En Arcor contamos con 1.500 hectáreas de cultivo para elaborar 150.000 toneladas de tomate al año. Procesamos 2 millones de kilos de tomate por día. En 2021 produjimos 49 millones de latas que exportamos a 14 países. En Grupo Arcor estamos comprometidos con la calidad en cada etapa de la cadena de valor, desde el campo hasta la mesa de nuestros consumidores. Nuestro espíritu de innovación nos permite potenciar nuestros procesos con la sustentabilidad como guía en cada paso que damos.
Okay, there were a few questions following the last four speakers. I'm going to read them. We had one question about the yields in China. Some people were questioning whether 120 ton per hectares wasn't a bit high. I don't know who wants to answer, Mike.
Yeah, I can. And I mean, you know, yields are always a function of Mother Nature and in a lot of other growing conditions, but it seems like the understanding that I heard in one of the reports a week or so ago, that might be the yield of the top end of the spectrum that a grower may achieve, but maybe not accurate for a full spectrum of growers, you know, across the bell curve. So that could be the highest tons per acre that an individual may achieve, but I don't think I would say that might be the average for the year, at least based on historical.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Another question was, Manuel presented the cost of production and the increase of all the cost in Yamitom countries. What is it like in the US, China, Australia, and other regions? Are we seeing the same rise in costs?
I'll let Jason go after, but I see, you know, on growing costs, yes. You know, they're still increasing. You know, as we get through the season, I would say they were probably up 10 to 11% overall from last year on the initial wave of inflation costs, and some of that's water also on the water sides of the situation. I'll defer to Jason on some of the other.
Jason, are you still here? I know it's the middle of the night for him, and he said he would leave at the end of the session.
That might be, yeah.
You may have left already. There were a couple of questions about the rise in low concentration products and asking why it was. One was asking whether it was a question of quality and flavor. Are there any answers for that?
Yes, it's not easy to answer the question, but probably I think it's because low bricks products and dyes are going to ready-to-eat food, no? And you know, the ready-to-eat food are increasing all over the world, no? And well, dyes or passatas are going to, I don't know, to pizzas, to lasagnas, to cannelonis, to at the end of the day, ready-to-eat foods, fresh foods or chilled food that you can see in the supermarket where tomatoes are main ingredients, no? You can see the soups or gazpachos here in Spain. So, and the low bricks and dyes has better flavor and taste. So probably one of the reasons why dyes and low bricks are increasing is because of this, not because they were increasing of ready-to-eat food in the supermarket, probably.
Okay,
I don't know if
Manuel.
Mike has another idea, but
no, I'd have to defer on that one to you.
And Francois, maybe?
I'm not a specialist of end product. Another reason is perhaps the lower need in high concentration products, as today you can prepare some ketchup, some viscous products without using highly concentrated product. You can gain some points, little points, but I think this is part of the actual move towards low concentration products. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And there was one last question about, I guess it's for Mike, about the US market. What's the balance between the volume of exports versus the domestic market at the moment, and maybe the target of a production of a processors?
We've been historically, around 20% on the export side, minimum. We've been as high, I think we've been as high as 26, 27% in the past. You know, a lot will depend on just, you know, the production this year. Obviously, with lower production, we're going to continue to be protecting the domestic markets, and then, you know, exporting also, you know, in the NAFTA region, but also in the other region. But a lot of it's going to depend on what, you know, what acreage we can get in the ground as this year develops. I think, you know, you could see a decrease in the export footprint just from a, you know, available supply. How much, it's uncertain at this point.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions that I have noted. There was just confirmation now that the global consumption, it's 5 kilograms of equivalent fresh tomatoes per person globally, but a big variation between the different countries. So I guess that's it for that now.